So, if you haven't been living under a rock, you know that yesterday, former U.S. President Donald Trump was convicted on all 34 counts of his kangaroo court case in New York City. The trial, which will most certainly live in infamy in American history, is a turning point in the storied legacy of this United States. What we have witnessed here is a code red, a 5 minutes to midnight warning sign that the corruption of the deep state is reaching critical mass. As we have already seen by the actions from our governments during the pandemic, total control of the masses is their aim, and they are pushing hard now to solidify that power over their citizens of this country. And very little now is left in their way. You see, once they're secure in power, the next step will be amnesty. The swarms of millions of people crossing the border will mean untold millions of fresh voters who will have allegiance only to the party that gives them the crumbs that they need to survive via the welfare state. They'll have a new breed of voters meant for one thing: to overwhelm the opposition party. And as of right now, there is only but one thing left in their way, and that is the removal of Donald Trump. This election, it seems, as far-fetched as it may have sounded just a few months ago, may very well define the future for generations to come, not just here in the U.S., but for the entire free world. For you see, as America goes, so does the rest of the West. And yet, amazingly, when you watch the mainstream media from CNN, MSNBC, CBS, ABC, Fox News, and all of the rest, this event is, for the most part, still being treated as just your average political horse race, as if the seismic shift that we have just witnessed it really happened. Instead, the focus is all about how much money will Donald Trump generate from this event, or what potential polling numbers might change because of this conviction. Think about this. We had a completely corrupt political trial that was just waged. It reminds me of the kind that took place in the USSR, that is, old communist Russia, and the communist China Cultural Revolution. It's the kind of show trial where the law really doesn't matter. And the truth? Well, who really cares about the truth, as long as you get Trump? There was a perfect storm where we had a corrupt judge and a crony activist prosecutor who were allowed to just run free. Nobody stopped them. They were allowed to abuse their power. They were allowed to let this farce trial run its course. There was little doubt of what the outcome would be, really, considering the setting and those running the operation. And look, I get the people who don't like Donald Trump. Either politically, he opposes what you desire, or perhaps you just don't like his mean tweets. That's just the normal ebb and flow of politics. But this, though, is different. We have watched the collapse of our justice system in real time over the course of the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. I think we've reached a point now where the average person, the average citizen, can see without a doubt that justice seems to only be served when you oppose the ruling class. The law will only apply to you then. The real purpose, my friends, of all this get Trump, get Trump, get Trump is to wage a war of fear to all the rest of the citizens of the United States, especially to potential billionaires who might get ideas to stop this inexorable shift into communism that we now seem to be under. And the left, especially those in the media, have finally got what they have so desperately wanted for the last 8 years. They finally get to say that Donald Trump has been convicted. They didn't care what it was, anything, as long as they could run the headline of Donald Trump convicted felon says X. So now, let's turn to take a look at the political fallout of all of this prosecution. And to do this, I'm going to take a story from the UK Daily Mail. This article is titled, "Drink Up Dems, A Hell of a Hangover is Coming." This is by Maureen Callahan of the UK Daily Mail. And here's what she writes. She says, Trump lost, and so is America. Not that you would know it from the most of yesterday's news coverage, so-called reporters and journalists practically levitating over 34 guilty verdicts in a trial that was nothing but a political hit job. You can dislike Donald Trump, as I and so many others do, and still find yourself outraged. This case, which the feds declined to prosecute, was flimsily predicated on election interference. Want to talk election interference? How about keeping the GOP nominee for president off the campaign trail for nearly 2 months? Or scheduling his sentencing just 4 days before the Republican convention? To all the progressives who are gloating and cheering, Well, live it up now, because you've probably just handed Trump another 4 years. America is diminished by this. We are becoming smaller and pettier with no reversal in sight. This is a loss beyond legality. It is hard to take pride in a nation that not only abides this, but revels in it. Not for nothing did Trump's website crash yesterday. Working people struggling in this economy that Biden insists is gangbusters are donating in outrage. Trump's campaign raised a mind-blowing $34.8 million within hours of the verdict, and his polling went up by 6 points, according to a Snap survey by DailyMail.com. These are the people who turned out by the thousands for Trump in the Bronx last week, who now see in him what they know all too well, profiling and targeting by a crooked criminal justice system. Now, Donald Trump is the unlikely hero of the downtrodden, while Joe Biden begs and bullies the black community for their vote. The part of the electorate that otherwise would have sat this one out? I mean, who wants to get out of bed to choose between two old men, flawed candidates no one really wants? Well, look at this persecution of Trump, the weaponization of our judicial system, and cast a vote not for Trump, but against what has been done to him. Here's what Trump said after the verdict, no longer the swaggering showman, but downcast, defeated, frustrated, and calm. This was a new Trump, one that we haven't seen before, composed, tonally on target, meeting the moment. He said, "This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. The real verdict is going to be on November 5th by the people." She said, apparently not one juror could look Trump in the face as the guilty verdict were read out, instead looking away at the floor. They knew what they had done. But these jurors, many well-educated, simply could not bear returning to their families, jobs, and polite society in deep blue New York City without convicting Donald J. Trump. "Everybody knows what happened here," Trump said. "We didn't do a thing wrong. I am a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. We'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we will win." But the mainstream media was raring and ready to go, presenting this verdict as a fait accompli, the end of Trump, as if it won't be overturned on appeal, as if his conviction won't be vacated, which, by the way, I expect it will. Anyway, Maureen goes on to write, "And the outrage over what has been done here, I believe, is only just the beginning." Now, I'm going to add something to what she's saying here. I don't believe it's just outrage. It is fear. The fear of a growing evil that's within our government that will someday reach out and control everyone if left unchecked. For example, here are some reactions online yesterday. This is Gad Saad. He is a respected professor, evolutionary behavioral scientist. Now, he wrote this. He said, "Let me remind everyone that I am a Canadian. Hence, my weighing in here is rooted in universalist principles. It would be extraordinarily beneficial for the United States if Donald Trump wins the upcoming election, and I hope that he'll be able to dismantle the cancerous corruption that has overtaken all American institutions that were supposed to be politically neutral. I truly believe that this is an inflection point for the U.S. and hence for the free world. My loyalty lies with the foundational principles that shape the U.S. and not with any given politician." And then we have this from Tony on Twitter.
He said he was guilty, but let me be the first to let them corrupt, sleazy know at November 5th I'm still voting for Donald Trump. I don't give a if he's on a ballot or not. I'm going to write his name down. Trying to throw this man in jail for some bullshit that Sleepy Joe do. All my black, white, Asian, Hispanic, and Indian Americans, we're going to form Voltron on November 5th. Yeah, boy, it's going to be electrifying. It's going to be the most emotional, impactful movement in history. Because in the first time in history, all walk of life is going to come together. We're not going to look at cultures. We're not going to look at race. We all one people. We all on the same page. I don't give a if you a blood, crip, trailer, trash, hood, biker gang. We all got one thing in common. And we done had enough.
And then finally, I have this from Graham Allen. And he wrote, "This is what political corruption looks like. Liberal New York Judge Merkin has changed the law and has instructed jurors that they do not have to unanimously agree on what crime Trump is guilty of. Merkin violated his oath to the Constitution, and here's the clip that he has. Let's watch this."
Well, let me ask you about the three choices. And one thing in particular that this judge said that these jurors could do. He just delivered what is being called really the pinnacle of all of this. He said that there is no need to agree on what has occurred. They can disagree on what the crime was among the three choices. Thus, this means that they could split 4-4-4, and the judge would still treat them unanimously. What does that mean?
Yeah. Well, it's really outrageous because in a normal criminal case, every statutory crime has what we call elements of the offense. Like in a bank robbery case, it's, you have to rob. It's got to be a financial institution. You have to show intent. Those are the things the jury has to agree on unanimously that they were proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Here, what we're doing is taking the element that actually makes this a felony, because remember, falsification of records is normally a misdemeanor in New York. What makes it a felony is that you're concealing or committing another crime. And here the judge is telling them they don't have to agree about what the other crime is under circumstances where that not only is what makes this a felony, what makes it a 4-year potential prison penalty rather than a year or less, but it's also what gets us into the courtroom, because if this had been a misdemeanor, the time to bring this case would have lapsed in 2019.
And the reality is here, there were so many irregularities for this farce of a trial. It seemed almost impossible under normal circumstances that this conviction wouldn't be overturned as it is. For example, as mentioned in the clip that we just watched, let's talk about the legal and procedural issues here. First, you had these bizarre novel legal theories. This is the prosecution's case that relied on untested legal theories, such as elevating this misdemeanor charge to felonies by alleging that the falsification of business records was intended to conceal another crime. This approach is seen as legally tenuous and unprecedented. Then, of course, as mentioned here, the weird jury instructions. The defense will most likely argue that the jury instructions were flawed. And there, of course, is also the fair trial concerns here, because obviously you had the pretrial publicity and jury bias. Trump's legal team had tried to argue that the extensive pretrial publicity and Trump's high-profile status made it impossible for him to receive a fair trial in Manhattan, obviously. They claimed that all the jurors knew Trump, which could have influenced their impartiality, which, of course, it seems that it did. Now, the judge's conduct is another big issue here. The defense criticized Judge Juan Mercan for his various rulings, including the denial of motions for a mistrial and the handling of evidence and testimony. They argued that these decisions compromised the fairness of the trial. And let us not forget the absurd key witnesses in this case and their complete lack of credibility. And yet, we still got Michael Cohen, known liar, convicted criminal. Cohen's history of lying and criminal behavior is a significant point of contention here. And Trump's defense will no doubt argue that his testimony should not have been relied on due to his past convictions for making false statements. And what about Stormy Daniels? She was lying on the stand, changing her story. The defense will contend that Daniels' testimony was excessively detailed and prejudicial and potentially biasing the jury. They will argue that her testimony included irrelevant, salacious details that were not necessary for the case, and of course, changing her story. And I'm not alone here in this opinion. Let's talk about some of the expert opinions out there. There was Jonathan Turley. He's a constitutional law attorney, and Turley believed that the case will eventually be reversed, either in the state or federal systems. He argued that the trial was a disappointment and that the jury's verdict was influenced by political motivations. Then we have John Malcolm, a former federal prosecutor, and Malcolm shared Turley's view, emphasizing the jury's reliance on Cohen's testimony despite his credibility issues. He also pointed out that the jury instructions favored the prosecution. And I could go on. There's many other experts in this field that feel the same way. So, knowing that this is most likely going to get overturned, this whole thing, again, not necessarily surprising, just actually being here and seeing this happen is still a bit surreal, unbelievable. So what I expect will be the outcome of all of this will not just be the short-term outrage that we're going to see here, but this realization by a large portion of the U.S. Population that wasn't already in Trump's camp. They're seeing that something has gone horribly wrong with our representative republic. There is an evil corruption that has taken hold in this country. It is spreading too rapidly to track now, and I believe that this sentiment will end up pushing them towards Donald Trump to put a stop to this. So Maureen goes on to write. She says, the whole trial was a farce, a sideshow, and utterly unbefitting of the world's last great superpower. The charges were brought by Alvin Bragg, a feckless district attorney responsible for soft-on-crime policies that are destroying this once great metropolis. A two-time convicted felon set a fellow subway rider on fire last week. His second attack this year, the first chasing 3 men with a lit object at a Chelsea subway station. Yet this guy was roaming the streets rather than behind bars. Turns out D.A. Bragg can get a conviction when he really sets his mind to it. And here was the liberal media celebrating him as a hero. Now, Maureen goes on to write that Bragg took his victory lap with a presser, Biden functionaries smirking in the background, outrageously claiming that this verdict was the result of following the facts and the law, and doing so without fear or favor. Please, Maureen writes, this entire trial was brought with favor to Biden and the Dems against Trump and MAGA. Not politically motivated? Explained Biden sending one of his comms down to the courthouse with Robert De Niro on Wednesday, the actor injecting himself into the face-painting, boob-flashing crowd with a speech no one asked for, calling Trump a loser and a clown. The lack of self-awareness is truly astounding. After the verdict, the New York Magazine immediately unveiled its next cover, Trump with tiny hands getting cuffed. Rachel Maddow had her all-star panel ready to go, everyone brimming with elation, self-satisfaction, congratulating each other for offering total objective coverage before welcoming the prosecution star witness Michael Cohen. For theater of the absurd, this was unbeatable. Maddow treated this cheap suit with his inelegant speaking voice and crude thought processes as if he were a top mind. Cohen is a convicted felon, an admitted liar, and a thief who stole $30,000 from Trump while in his employ, and whose bitterness at not following Trump to the White House has been his animating force ever since. But sure, let's treat him like the Rosetta Stone. Same for Stormy Daniels, the prosecution's second most important witness whose story conveniently changed on the stand. No longer the Spitfire porn star, Stormy was now some kind of victim who blacked out during what she called her mediocre unprotected sex with Trump, accessorizing her tale of woe with unnecessarily prurient details like the alleged involvement of spanking. This was Christmas morning for much of the media, otherwise clutching its proverbial pearls at the notion of suppressed stories. So let's talk about suppressed stories. Maureen writes, Ashley Biden, in a legal filing weeks ago, admits that her diary is real, a diary which contains the entries, quote, I was molested, I think so, as well as showers with my dad, probably not appropriate. Aside from this publication, there has been complete media blackout on Ashley's diary. Without fear or favor, it's all just self-serving garbage. Hunter Biden's trial, we've been told, is a political hatchet job too. And Joe's family taking millions from China and other countries, what makes Biden think a President Trump will turn around and weaponize his DOJ against him? Well, aside from the fact that he didn't go after Hillary Clinton, I mean, there's precedent there. Anyway, Maureen writes, a dangerous precedent has been set. If Biden were truly presidential, he'd have insisted that this Justice Department drop the case. Instead, he took to Twitter immediately after the verdict and began panhandling. Maureen writes, I'm sorry, when has Biden ever hated to ask for money? Now, if anyone thinks that's actually Biden taking to social media, you got another thing coming to you, but whatever, minor footnote here. Anyway, Maureen goes on to write that there's a devastating story in Politico this week which reports that Democrats are in full-blown freakout over Biden's chances. One Dem advisor said, donors ask me on an hourly basis about what I think, adding that it's so much easier to show them data, so while they read it, I can pour a drink. Get ready to drown those sorrows, Dems. When the first presidential debate takes place on June 27th, the first question for Donald Trump will surely be, as a now convicted felon, how can you possibly hold the office of President of the United States? Liberal America, Maureen writes, still doesn't get it. They have learned nothing from 2016. This verdict and much of the media's obvious glee and biased coverage just got Trump reelected. And they'll say they never saw it coming. The reality is, where we are is completely uncharted waters. The U.S. is in deep trouble right now, and there's no telling what's going to happen next. Political football aside here, justice in America does seem like a fleeting memory at this point. What the law actually says doesn't seem to matter anymore, and you could really trace its roots back to the beginning of illegal immigration being accepted, the idea that we would just allow millions and millions of people to be here illegally. Once you start allowing certain laws to no longer matter, then eventually you're going to just get people who say, well, why not this law? It's good for us. Screw it. So, I don't know. We are in unprecedented times here. We're going to be seeing history in the making. And rest assured, I'm going to be chronicling it as we go. From the To Be Frank show, my friends, thanks for watching as always. I'll see you in the next one.